Hey everybody, Aaron Bishop here with Darish Chai. Today we're going to do something special. This is just a special one-time recording. I have a special guest here with me, my beautiful, lovely wife. Say hello.
Hey.
Rebekah. And today we have a bit of a testimony for you. So back in March, we went to a Remnant Radio healing conference. The Remnant Radio is a group of guys who do a podcast where they explore all sorts of biblical topics, and they check them against the Bible and see what floats to the top and what's discardable. And we had some questions about the gifts of the Spirit and how they applied in our lives. And so we went to the Remnant Radio conference to just see what they were doing, to see how they were applying the gifts of healing. The first night there, we had an interesting experience.
Yes, very interesting.
We weren't sure what we were walking into. I have some experience in charismatic circles that were not exactly biblically based or necessarily all that good. Rebekah doesn't have a whole lot of experience in charismatic circles at all. And so we weren't really sure what we were going to get into. And we didn't really go with any expectation of anything happening. But we went just to kind of get the lay of the land and to see what was going on. So what were you expecting as we went to the Remnant Radio conference? What were your thoughts?
I really didn't have any expectations. I kind of just went in blank slate, and I kind of just wanted to see what it was all about. I never would have actually gone without our good friend Ron, so shout out to Ron. But I just went thinking, well, let's see what this is all about. I have no idea.
Right. So the conference was held in Statesville, North Carolina. We live about 3 hours away. And so we made a weekend of it. Ron, our mutual friend, and us, we drove up to Statesville, and it was something else. It was quite a blessing.
It was very eventful.
Right. So on the Remnant Radio, if you're familiar with them, they actually did an episode on the testimonies that came out of this healing conference. Well, in that video, they actually mention what happened to us, or what happened specifically to my wife, Rebekah. Those of you who have seen that video, you're going to recognize that name, Rebekah, because this is the Rebekah of, I guess, infamy from that from the conference. We did reach out to them as they asked through email. Rebekah sent them an email with kind of her testimony, and we haven't seen anything from them since. I don't know if they're doing it on Patreon, if it's just something that we didn't see. I do know that they did have more of the testimony type stuff on Patreon after the conference, but we're not Patreon subscribers to the Remnant Radio, and so we and so we haven't seen anything from it. And since this isn't just their testimony, this is God's testimony. In essence, we wanted to share it, to make sure that it is available for everyone to be able to just hear how great God is. So the first night of the conference, we walk in, we sit up at the very top of the auditorium. There's about 400 people in this place, and we're at in the balcony at the very front of the balcony. So they go through the teaching that night, and at the end of it, they go up to the stage for a time of ministry. We're not sure what's going to happen. They're going to do some prophetic stuff, some healing stuff. We're just sitting there, just taking it all in, just trying to see what is this all about.
Right. Absolutely.
So it's at this point that something pretty incredible happened. So why don't you share what happened at this point in the conference?
Okay, so first of all, I kind of need to back up just a hair. I grew up the best terminology would be cessationist. And I pretty much grew up believing that the gifts of the Spirit were basically non-existent at this point. I mean, preaching, sure, absolutely. And maybe administration, but speaking in tongues and gifts of healing, and only healing happens in, doctor's offices and stuff like that. So I kind of just didn't know that this was a real thing. I've heard stories of stuff in like Africa or,
Right.
Faraway places.
Right.
But nothing close to home. So I'm going into this going, well, God, if this is real, I just want you to show up. I just want to see. I want to see that this is real and this isn't just some charlatan, some make believe. And, I just really don't have any faith that this is real. And the whole first session of the night was one of the major points they were pushing was all of this begins and ends with repentance. That I could get behind 100%. So I was already going, okay, these guys, I respect what they're having to say. So I was just sitting there, and they start this time of
prophetic ministry.
Yeah, ministry. And the whole auditorium is silent. There's 400 people in this auditorium, and it's silent. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm praying in my head, not out loud. God, if this is real, I want to see something real. And the guy gets up, first guy, I don't remember which, Josh, maybe. And he says,
No,
I have a word for a lady in the back. And she's wearing a gray t-shirt. My t-shirt's gray. And she's sitting between two men. Aaron, Ron. I'm in the back of the auditorium. I'm maybe up in the front of the top, but I'm still in the back of the auditorium. And I'm going, that's weird. Kind of horoscope accuracy, And then he points the lady out, and I'm like, okay, it's not me. I'm fine. We're fine. And he says, he tells her a prophecy, a verse that I've actually been hanging on to for quite some time. And it says, I believe that I will see good in the land of the living. And I was just like, oh, that was really, that was kind of special. But again, kind of horoscope level accuracy could have applied to a lot of people. Okay. All right. This is okay. And the next guy gets up, and it's Miller.
So the first guy was actually Michael Roundtree.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Was the first one to get up and to give this this verse to another woman sitting at the very back of the lower level of the auditorium, and even on the other side of the auditorium from us. But then Michael Miller gets up, and he's second. And
he says, guys, this is either going to be completely accurate or completely wrong. And I'm like, well, I can respect that. I respected that he was willing to be wrong. And he goes, God's just given me a name. Rebekah. Colon issues. And I basically stopped breathing. In the entire auditorium, I was the only person that applied to.
So colon issues, that's something that's really a big part of your life.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about some of the colon issues that you have experienced through your life.
Okay, so I grew up sick. I have had stomach problems pretty much my entire life. I grew up every single day telling my mom my head hurt and my stomach hurt. And that was just a standard operating procedure for me. To the point where I was in and out of the doctor's offices pretty much nonstop growing up. And when I was 18, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And before my 19th birthday, I had 2.5 feet of my colon removed because of an ulcer that would not heal. And then it really, I still had problems, and I kept having problems. We got married, and for the first several years of our marriage, I was in and out of hospitals literally every other weekend. I would be admitted overnight for several days at a time, regularly, and I just constantly was having troubles.
So when we got married, she was sick. That was just all there was to it. In fact, at one point during our dating, I took 40 days. We took a 40-day break from each other. And I just needed some time to clear my head and to really seek God on whether or not she was the person that I should marry. And at the end of that 40 days, I walked into her hospital room because she was in the hospital once
Again.
again for stomach-related issues. We got married several months later, and for the first 10 years of our marriage, we've been married 20 years now. For the first 10 years of our marriage, it was hospital constantly. Whether it was every other weekend in the ER for just excruciating pain, every other month being admitted for 2 to 3 days just to get pain under control, new treatments or experimental treatments, or, well, that last one didn't work, let's try something new. That was our life for the first 10 years of our life. During this time, we had 2 children while she was still completely sick, and it's all glory to God that they are both perfectly healthy.
That they're even here.
Right. And so then around 10 years ago, something significant happened that really shook us up. Why don't you talk about how that event and what it was that really kind of shook the core of our
World.
being. Yeah, the core of our world.
So I went to my gastroenterologist, and he basically says, I can't fix you. I can't help you. Everything that I have tried has not worked, and I'm just going to have to discharge you. You're going to have to either find someone else or basically go home and die. And it was devastating. I mean, there are no words to describe that. And we both sat there and just kind of in shock for...
It was a good week or two that we were just completely in shock.
At least a week or two. And then we just said, okay, there's got to be something. So over the course of the next several years, we did a lot of research and eventually discovered that I had several severe food allergies that were actually causing most of my problems. The other side of it was that I had an enormous amount of scar tissue. I've had 11 surgeries, 10 at that point. And it was just, my stomach was just basically a giant spider web full of scar tissue inside. And eventually I started feeling better. And after getting a lot of the food allergy situation under control and just being able to manage everything a little bit better, I started feeling better. And then all of a sudden I was feeling worse again.
So let's stop at the food allergies for a second. These food allergies that you had, do you still have them today?
No, I don't.
So with the food allergies, the process that we went through can only be attributed. It is a miracle of God. She is not allergic to the same foods today. In fact, her diet is completely open to whatever we would like to eat. But there was a time for at least 3 years where we had a extremely strict diet. No corn, no rice, no gluten, no soy, no peanuts, and no dairy.
No dairy.
Which, as you can
was
imagine,
the big one.
which, as you can imagine, leaves you with very little that you can actually eat.
Yeah, it was a very limited diet.
Yeah, it was, and a very expensive diet, we found out, because we also had to get as close to natural as possible, which means avoiding chemicals, the pesticides, which means attempting to avoid anything like genetic modification, just because her body would react to those things. And so you're coming out of this, it was around 2015, 2016 or so, right?
Yeah, I think so.
When we started to be able to eat regular food again.
Mm-hmm.
So you're starting to get better. Then what happened?
Well, then all of a sudden I'm starting to hurt again. And it's increasingly getting worse and worse and worse. And I can barely eat anything because absolutely everything hurts. And I'm just completely and utterly miserable all over again.
The second round of everything hurting so bad, it got really drastic,
Right.
really quick. And I mean, for my part, I was not any help. I was attributing it all to her mind, to hypochondria, to she's causing it to herself. It's all mental. There's nothing physical going on. And it all kind of came to a head in one day. Why don't you tell people about that day and what you ended up discovering and what ended up happening?
Okay, so we weren't doing great. And I got to the point where I actually tried to go to the bathroom and I couldn't. Like, I literally could not pee. It hurt so bad. Every time I tried to pee, it felt like my stomach was ripping open. And I knew I had to get help immediately. And if I didn't get help, I knew I was going to die. That's all there was to it. So I ended up calling my mom and asking her to take me to the doctor. And she did willingly, and she took me over to the doctor's office, and the doctor said the same thing they always say. Well, there's some inflammation, and we could put you on some steroids, and, you probably need a CAT scan, but, we'll have to schedule it. And it was just the same old, same old. But I knew without a doubt that if I did not get help, I was going to die. I couldn't even pee. I could not pee. So I went to the ER instead after the doctor's appointment, and they take me in, they do a CAT scan, and they tell me, there's a pocket of inflammation, and we're going to need to drain that. We're going to admit you, and, we'll take care of this for you. So I'm just like, okay, at least I'm, able to get the pee out. I'm not going to die from an exploded bladder, which truly was a fear for me at that time. And so then I'm sitting there just like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen next. And then I'm sitting in their ER forever waiting for a room to open up. And then they wheel me into the OR and straight into surgery. And I was just like, wait, I'm having surgery? What's going on? I had no idea whatsoever. And apparently I had a complete rupture of my colon. And my body had formed a pocket around the rupture. So I was not septic, which was a miracle.
That's a miracle of itself.
I really needed blood. But I told the doctor, do not give me blood unless it's absolutely, my life depends on it. And he looks me straight in the eyes and he says, I'm going to need to give you blood. And I said, not unless it saves my life. And that was it. And I woke up from surgery. He hadn't needed to give me blood. He said, you lost a teaspoon of blood. I don't know how that happened. That's never happened before. They took another 2.5 feet of my colon.
So the surgery was actually quite miraculous. You lost only a teaspoon or two of blood. They took while taking 2.5 feet of your colon, and then released you without a colostomy bag.
Right.
Like, they were able to put it all back together. And this doctor, he said he went in my conversation with him afterward, he went in, he was able to cut away a lot of the scar tissue that had formed, that had been causing issues with constricting her bowels to the point where things were not passing through, and which then led to the rupture and everything else that had occurred. And so the surgery itself was a miracle, but it did happen through
medical means,
right. So since then, have you had any issues?
I have not had any pain whatsoever since then. That was 35 years of pain.
Gone.
And I woke up from the surgery, and you almost couldn't even call the incision pain compared to what I had been dealing with. It was discomforting. It was obnoxious, but it didn't hurt. I was able to climb up into a tree 3 months later and chop down the tree with a chainsaw by myself. I healed so fast. It was unbelievable. And it was absolutely 100% a miracle. I was completely released from the doctor's care 1 month after the surgery. And when the doctor walked into the office to release me, he walks in with my chart in his hand. And then he looks at me and goes, "Oh, excuse me, I'm in the wrong room." And he turns around and he walks out. And I hear him and the nurse in the hallway. And he goes, "That's not the right patient." And she goes, yes, it is. He goes, "That is not the lady I did a surgery on." And she walks him back into the room, and he looks at me. He goes, "Mrs. Bishop?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he was blown away. He's like, "There's no way. I never would have recognized you." So God did a huge healing in my life, and I hadn't had any pain at all in years.
So you haven't had pain in around 8 years or so. Is there anything else that you've been dealing with your gut? Any other issues besides pain that you might be dealing with?
Well, I generally have a hard time digesting beef. Beef is just kind of a, If I have only a little bit, only occasionally, it's okay. And I can manage that. But if I have beef more than once in a month or so, I'm probably going to be having problems.
So that's it. That's the only issue that you've had since this surgery.
Yeah, really and truly.
So what was so significant about the Remnant Radio experience?
So, it was really awkward because he calls Rebekah and he calls colon issues. And my first thought is, but I really don't even have colon issues anymore. It really puzzled me, to be honest with you, because I was kind of thinking, well, maybe God just said that so that it would be specific that it was me he was asking to come forward. But I just didn't have any idea because, I had some scar tissue issues and stuff like that, but it wasn't a big deal anymore. I already had my healing. But it was still an answer to prayer that it was real. And God called me by name to come forward. And I came forward, and Miller prayed for me. And it was, I don't even have words. It was weird because I was still thinking, but I don't really need healing.
So what were your initial thoughts as we were going away from the conference that first night back to our Airbnb? What were your kind of initial thoughts that you shared with Ron and I of what had happened, what had gone on?
Well, I said, hey, maybe we should go get some steak.
That she did. Did we go get steak?
No,
we did not.
It was really late at night.
It was really late. We kind of talked about what the purpose of you being called up there might have been. What kind of did you settle on as what the purpose for being called up there might have been?
So I think we just basically thought that God saw us. And he saw everything I'd gone through. All of the stuff that was attached to that label of colon issues, and all of the trauma and the emotional trauma and the just all of the stuff, and that God saw it, and it wasn't wasted, and he knew that struggle, and he cared. And that was really, really special. Because if he saw me in my situation, he saw you, he saw Ron, he saw everybody in our own places. And that was really, really special.
It did end up helping us to kind of be all in for the rest of the conference.
Oh, absolutely.
So that we weren't there being skeptical through the entire thing. There was this sense of, wow, this is all real. Which is something that neither of us had really experienced before, was a real use of the gifts of the Spirit in a very controlled, very calm setting. Usually when
Decently and in order.
Decently and in order, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 14. Often when I've experienced charismatic type stuff before, it's not been decent or in order. It's just people are yelling out in tongues and
falling out on the floor,
or running up and down the aisles, or it just seems so weird that people are being just odd, and none of it is like, I can't look in my Bible and see any of this going on. Okay, I can see tongues, but really, is this what tongues is supposed to be? Because it doesn't. I don't see how this is helping anybody. And it's not being done according to 1 Corinthians 14, where if there's not an interpreter, you're not supposed to do it. And so this was the first time that we had experienced something where it was just incredibly
Obvious that it was
obviously
God.
that God was there and he
Yeah.
was working. So since then, have you noticed anything that's changed since then?
So, we've been able to eat beef a lot. And I haven't had any troubles. I have been able to have, we probably within the first week and a half of being back from the conference, we had beef like 6 or 7 times. And I didn't have the slightest problem at all. And I really kind of almost expected to, as sad as that is, but I didn't. I didn't have any more problems at all. And I've been eating a lot of beef and not had any problems at all.
I think it was about 2 weeks after the conference, we had a week and a half where almost every night or every other night there was something beef related, whether it was roast hamburgers, beef hot dogs, whatever. It was something beef related for a
In
while.
October, we had Sukkot, and we had steak and beef hot dogs, and we had chili that was beef, and then we had hamburgers. It was like 4 meals in a row in 1 week, and I was miserable.
Now, it wasn't pain, though, right? It was just discomfort.
Yeah, it was just things weren't progressing like they should,
Right.
and all of the discomfort that comes with that.
So, since the conference, you've not experienced any of that?
Not at all. Not at all.
So, what we originally thought was just God saying, hey, I see you, was actually a healing.
It was.
It was a healing of the last remnants of your colon issues that you've been dealing with for your entire life.
It's and interestingly enough, although he didn't call it out, my asthma has been significantly decreased and only really acts up when I'm in close proximity to a bunch of dogs.
Right. So your dog allergies still exist.
Yeah, too bad.
But asthma and other circumstances has decreased drastically.
Drastically.
So Michael Miller, if you're out there, pray for her asthma.
Yes.
But regardless, this thing that we thought was solved for a very long time, this issue with her colon that we thought was done. God had healed it, and we weren't dealing with it anymore. Even though there was still some stuff kind of hanging on, we found out that even that God cared about.
You know, I kind of thought it was selfish to ask for more healing.
Right.
And that might sound silly, but I received so much already. I felt like it would be selfish of me to take more. So interestingly enough, we were studying just recently this weekend in Joshua 15, where Caleb's daughter asks her father for more. She asks for springs when he gives her the arid land, and he graciously gives it to her. And it's meaningful to me because God already gave me healing, and then he gave me more. And that's not something that I expected. But sometimes I guess we should ask for more.
As Paul says in 1 Corinthians at least 3 times, he says, seek the gifts of God. He's speaking specifically of spiritual gifts. But then Jesus in the New Testament, he says, which of you, if you ask your father for bread, would give you a stone? Your Father in heaven, he's a good Father, and he will give you good gifts. So if you're out there and you're hurting and you're dealing with something, a health issue that just hasn't gone away, and maybe even you prayed for it or people have prayed for you for it multiple times and nothing has happened, don't stop. Keep praying. Your Father in heaven gives good gifts, and he will give good gifts. And in our case, it took
A long time.
It took 34 years for her to even begin to see the inkling of the first bit of healing. And then the rest of the healing, it took 3 years pretty much to get to the point of no pain. And then it came back and that was healed. And then even the last little vestiges of colon issues, God finally, through a miraculous means, just a one and done, which we hadn't experienced before. It had always been something medical had been involved in one way or another. It just that done. It's over with. And God's healing miracle was able to have a place in her life. And this is something that we had prayed for a very long time.
Very long time.
Ever since I've known her, I've prayed that God would heal her. I've always had this fear in the back of my head that I would have to bury her early because of her colon issues when we got married. And I'm blessed by God to not have to contemplate that anymore. And it was just always a fear every time we went to the hospital. Every time I'd go and visit her. She's been in the hospital for 5 days. Got to keep going in and seeing her every day and spending just hours and hours sitting by her bedside in the ER or in the hospital. It was always just plaguing my thoughts in the back of my mind that one day it would be the last time. And God has answered our prayers. And it is, it's just awesome to behold and to comprehend. And because of this experience in our lives, we are no longer cessationists. While she grew up cessationist, I grew up basically non-practicing continuationist, where the miracles happen, sure, but they always happen somewhere else. They don't happen here. We're too civilized, we're too modern, and it just doesn't happen here. It doesn't happen in the U.S. Obviously it does. It does happen in the U.S. God still works even here. And so just, we pray that this testimony blesses you. We pray that even the guys at Remnant Radio are able to see this and are able to just know that the ministry, and I know that they know this, but their ministry does touch lives and it does bring healing to people. And they are doing God's work and practicing the gifts of the Spirit.
And thank you.
And thank you, yes. And for anyone else that's out there watching or listening, just know God's Spirit is still powerful. His gifts are still applicable. And here's proof. So as you go forward in your life, as you go out there and seek life.
In all that you do.
Shalom.
Shalom.